Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this fantastic session on strategic granting. I'm joined here today with Nick Godsoe, who is the Director of Programs and Education at the nonprofit. So we're so thrilled to welcome you to the Promise of Music. My name is Evelyn, and I'm here on behalf of the Glenn Gould Foundation. We are the organization that's hosting the Congress. We are so thrilled to welcome you to sessions this week. We have sessions running in this room on Wednesday, today, and Friday, as well as in the Chrysalis Theater just across the street. So make sure you take a look at the schedule, get yourselves acquainted with it, and enjoy all the sessions that we have. But today, I'm joined here, as I mentioned, by Nick. He has been an incredible leader and active advocate for music ed for years. He did his undergrad at at Mount Allison, and then his master's at University of Toronto. He's a dedicated advocate, as I mentioned, and has worked extensively with community music programs and school programs across the country. He'll introduce you to MusiCounts and bring you along for a wonderful session. And now I pass it off to Nick.
Thanks, Evelyn. This is very tender for Evelyn and I because Evelyn worked at MusiCounts with me for about 5 years. So this has been a very cute rekindling with a very dear friend. So thank you, Evelyn. Music education in Canada is two things. It's vibrant, but it's also chronically underfunded. I'll talk more about the mechanics of MusiCounts' process and what this all looks like, but we hear from schools, several hundred schools a year, talking to us about the barriers they face, the challenges they face in terms of offering the students of their school a music education that is inclusive and accessible. I was reading through last night some applications just to see if I could happen upon any snapshots that would kind of summarize things, and I just came across everything that I know, but it was validating to read through everything, to hear about a lot of schools that seek support for MusiCounts that have buckets, and that's it. A lot of schools that are working with instruments that are 40 or 50 years old that are held together by duct tape. A lot of schools that have no music education program at all, even though the curriculum would imply that school should have music. It's simply not happening. So that's where MusiCounts comes in. We shouldn't have to. You would expect that decision makers and policymakers would acknowledge the significant scope of research that underscores the benefit of music education, but when you read some of these applications, you have to wonder what the thought process is. Again, I love my job, I'm happy to have it. I should not have to have it. We should not need to be here. But there's a lot of really interesting things that we learn through MusiCounts and through the work that we do. And that's kind of the scope of what I'm hoping to talk to you about today. So for today, I want to introduce you to the work that MusiCounts strives to do. I want to show you how we work. I want to show you what we've learned, how we've evolved, and how we foster change, and finally, where we might go from here. Before I kind of dive into the MusiCounts of it all, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, so you kind of have a sense for where I'm coming at this all from. Like Evelyn said, I did my undergraduate music at Mount Allison University in tuba performance. Realized pretty shortly after studying music at the undergrad level that I did not want my livelihood to hinge on the sound that came out of my tuba. So I talked to my profs and I was like, what do I do if I don't want to be a performer? And they were like, oh, if you don't want to be a performer, you should do musicology. That's what non-performers do. I was like, oh, cool. So I did my master's degree in musicology at the U of T, started my PhD, and then I realized I gotta get the heck out of here. And then I left. I dropped out after 7 years of post-secondary music school. I was living in Toronto. I had no money, and I felt a sense of betrayal that I spent so much time in a post-secondary music environment, but had really no grounding in terms of how to activate that to support my livelihood. And I was lucky enough to stumble upon a job posting at MusiCounts. It was due 2 hours after I discovered it, so I frantically threw together an application, and I've been with MusiCounts now for 7 years. The separation between music industry and music education is quite prominent, and I feel that acutely because MusiCounts is the official charity of the JUNO Awards. So I kind of have one leg in the music education space and one leg in the music industry space, and I see how separately these worlds exist for no reason, in my opinion. So I have a panel about this on Friday where we're kind of talking about the intersection of music industry and music education, why they're so separated and how they can come together. So if you're not tired of hearing me gab after this, I welcome you to come on Friday, because it'll be a really good conversation about some of these systemic barriers to including business perspectives in music education contexts. Anyway, MusiCounts. So we're a national music education charity. We've been operating since 1997, and it's our mandate to build a thriving culture of music education in Canada that prioritizes inclusivity, sustainability, and innovation. So we're going to be talking about those words and what those words mean a lot throughout the presentation today, but we achieve our mandate through kind of three core things. We directly invest in schools and communities through grant programs. That's the foundation of our work. Those are our flagship programs, so we'll talk lots about that throughout the talk. We provide training and career development. We provide training and career development both for young artists. Music education isn't just kids in a band room playing clarinet. Music education is a 24-year-old singer-songwriter learning how to leverage sync and licensing to make that be a solid revenue stream so they can continue to do their craft and make money. So we offer programs for young artists so they can develop their business acumen with the music industry. And we also offer training and career development for music educators. We know when you go to school to be a music educator, when you do your undergraduate degree in music, we know there's a lot of things that are talked about, and we know there are a lot of things that are not talked about. So what we do is we work with our national team of educators across the country, identify what the gaps are, and create resources and professional development opportunities to fill those gaps. So for example, we've worked with some of our Indigenous music education advisors to create a resource to give a framework for music educators if they're interested in bringing Indigenous music in the classroom, because we know that that's not talked about when you do a BBUs in most places. We have a resource all about how to have conversations around Canadian hip hop and social justice issues in the classroom. Because we know when you go to school to be a music teacher, you're probably not talking a lot about hip hop, but that might be of interest to your students. And that being able to talk about that and being equipped to talk about that through comprehensive resources and professional development opportunities might enable you to take a leap of faith and try something new. So I'll talk more about how we kind of foster change in music education through the creation of teaching resources and professional development opportunities and training as well. And finally, we give a national voice to the importance of music education. We leverage our platform with the JUNO Awards and with some other, through other national avenues to champion the fact that music education ought to be adequately funded and ought to be in every school, and that I shouldn't need to be here talking about working for a charity that steps in for the government not doing its job properly, right? One of my favorite parts of the job is the MusiCounts Teacher of the Year Award. So what we do is we have a JUNO Award for a music teacher every year. So what we do is we have a process whereby educators are nominated, and then we're able to whittle that down to 5 finalist nominees, and we bring them to the JUNO Awards, wherever the JUNO Awards are, and give them the celebrity treatment that they deserve. They are a vital and significant part of the Canadian music industry, and they ought to be there on the biggest night of Canadian music. So we give them the celebrity experience, we take them on the red carpet, we do the whole thing, and then the winner is announced live on the JUNO Awards broadcast. And one of the really cool things that we do is create like a little mini documentary about every teacher of the year every year that kind of summarizes their work and their impact. And I can't think of anyone better than Dr. Darren Hamilton, who was a classroom educator until last year. He's now an assistant professor of music education at the University of Toronto. He'll be joining me on a panel this afternoon if you're interested. But I can't think of anyone better who kind of embodies the vision for music education in Canada that MusiCounts tries to champion. Those values of inclusivity, innovation, and sustainability. So I just want to show you the video that we made about Darren and his practice, because I think it's a really good good preface for the conversation today.
I learned that I had the gift of teaching, and I decided to take that gift and combine it with my passion, my desire for music, and my passion for working with youth, that is what led me to becoming a music educator. In 2019, we decided to survey students here at our school, particularly Black students who were not taking our traditional instrumental music class. I advocated for the inclusion of a brand new music course called the Sounds and Sights of Hip Hop and R&B. In this course, we teach hip hop music and we teach R&B music. And this was a direct result of the voices and the needs of our Black students and racialized students who also have an interest in learning about music from Black culture. The Band-Aid grant that we received from MusiCounts enabled us to purchase a class set of DJ consoles for our school and enabled us to start a new hip hop and R&B course where students have an opportunity to learn about hip hop culture, but they also have an opportunity to learn how to DJ.
This is the first year we get to ever use DJ consoles, and it was amazing. I'm so blessed that I actually got to take this course.
One of the cool things that we're excited about doing is to create opportunities for students to be able to DJ for assemblies, school dances.
Mr. Hamilton came up to me and asked me if I'd be okay with DJing in front of the school. Soon enough, I started enjoying being able to have everyone hear my music in the morning.
Education is not about teaching one way to do things. It's important for students to see themselves represented so that they can be engaged in learning and that they can see how the different skills or tools that they're learning in the classroom can be applied to their own life experience.
Mr. Hamilton makes all of us feel engaged, passionate about what we're learning, and very excited to learn.
You know, I can't really recall another music course where I've been focusing on just mainly African American music and things that don't usually get the spotlight in most music courses.
In Canada, Western art music is considered superior to all other forms of music making. There's no culture or no tradition that doesn't make music. There are so many rich musical traditions in our country that are not taught in schools, and that has to stop. Darren is challenging the status quo of colonialism by demanding for spaces for Black music in music curriculum. Darren is nurturing the students' well-being. That's what I would call the hallmark of a great educator.
Good. Let's try that again. This time we are going to, after we finish.
My hope for music education is that students will be able to see themselves represented in the music classroom, and that students will be able to explore any genre of music that they have an interest in exploring.
The essence of who Darren is his humility and his kindness, and the way that he's able to express that through music is just incredible. Darren has given us a model to move forward, and we can't turn back.
My name is Darren Hamilton, and I am the music teacher at David Suzuki Secondary School, and I am the 2022 MusiCounts Teacher of the Year.
Darren would be mortified if he knew I was showing this video in a presentation. Yeah. So just kind of keep a lot of the themes you saw in that video in the back of your mind as I kind of proceed here. So, like I said, the core of my work at MusiCounts, is our school music funding program. So these programs, it's an application-based program whereby we allocate grants of up to $20,000 to high needs school music programs for whatever they need, from tubas to turntables. You know, all approaches to music education are included. It can be a school that has, a really strong music program that needs a boost to help it be more sustainable. It can be a school that has no music education at all, and they're looking to use MusiCounts funding to help start something new at their school. It's our specialty in getting instruments to high need schools, wherever those schools are. And in our time doing this work over the past 19 or so years, we've allocated nearly $20 million to more than 1,500 schools and community organizations in all corners of this country. Sometimes, obviously, when we talk about barriers to access in music education, there are a lot of them. Geography is certainly one of them. You see a lot of dots up there towards the Arctic Circle, and you can imagine the logistics involved in getting musical instruments to some of Canada's most remote communities that we've managed to pull it off. But it doesn't happen easily. Evelyn, when she worked at MusiCounts, she actually played a really key role in kind of developing our remote shipping strategy and our remote shipping tactics, and she has a lot of really cool stories in terms of like the scope of what's involved in getting instruments to places where it's not easy to get instruments to. Do you want to speak a little bit? Do you want to talk about the barge?
Yeah, I can tell the barge story.
Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, the barge story. What is the barge story? So when you're looking at this map, you see there are some bubbles further up across the country in the territories and also in Labrador. And the barge story actually doesn't start at Labrador, it starts in Newfoundland at an instrument retailer called Reed's Music. And Reed's Music gave me a call one day and said, hey, you know, we have this order for this school. It's a school in Labrador. It's a remote school. Fantastic music program running out of the school. They wanted to bring in an upright piano. This was the first time in their entire community that they'd ever had access to an upright piano, and they wanted to bring it in. They'd only ever had keyboards at this particular school. And so the teacher had worked kind of tirelessly to get everything arranged, but one tricky part about delivering an upright an upright piano to a school in Labrador at that time of the year is that the ice begins to freeze. And you have limited shipping options. You're either going to fly it in, which is so cost prohibitive, those students aren't going to get access to that specific instrument, or you try and barge it in as quickly as possible because the timing is so limited. So we had one day before the ice was going to freeze. Truly one day, I got one call from Reed's Music, and the retailer just said, you know, it's the last day that we're sending out the boat. We just found out that, you know, the piano has arrived at our store. Like, you know, what can you do to get the financing in place to make this happen? And we just said, you know what, we're going to put it on the boat, we're going to get it there, and within 24 hours, we set sail with an upright to that school, and they've had the instrument ever since. So lots of logistics like that to figure out. We've sent karaoke machines to Nunavut, and part of the logistics is just part of the job. We really don't think that having barriers to shipping should be a reason that a school shouldn't have access to instruments. And unfortunately, we live in a country where that is a decision that school boards aren't willing to subsidize. So I guess that's kind of why we're here. I wish, like Nick said, we didn't exist, but the barge story is just one of many. I really, when you look at the most northernmost part of this map, all of those schools, you know, had some kind of shipping support, and it doesn't necessarily happen without the work of a whole community, whether that's teachers in schools, whether that's the retailers themselves, and also community partners. You know, we've had to build community partnerships and
the Evelyns.
So it's been good.
And the Evelyns and the Tara.
And
Tara's
the
on the
Tara.
programs team. So every one of these dots comes with, you know, a lot of work. And sometimes the shipping costs more than the instruments themselves. So it's just another thing. So anywho, the MusiCounts approach, you know, I'll talk about this in you know, pretty high level terms, but I'm happy to answer any more specific questions you have at the end. So the first thing that we're doing is we're obviously trying to identify the highest need schools across the country. We don't just click on the application form and hope for the best. Every year we have a targeted outreach strategy whereby we identify particular areas of the country where we know youth face a lot of barriers to success, and we're picking up the phone, we're calling the local libraries, we're calling local politicians, we're calling local schools, we're making them aware that this funding opportunity exists. And something that happened to me in my first year, and I'll talk more about this later, but I was calling a school in northern Manitoba, and I was like, it's like reverse telemarketing, you know? It's like, hello, I have this grant opportunity that you might be interested in applying for if you have a music program. And the principal was like, oh, we don't have music education at the school, like we wouldn't be eligible. All we have is like an Indigenous drumming group. And I was like, well, of course you can apply. Of course that's something that's eligible. That's something we want to be able to fund. But perceptions of what is and isn't music education are so deeply ingrained that he thought that he wasn't eligible for this music education grant. So I'll talk more about the importance of broadening our perception and our articulation of music education later, but that's just kind of part of what the outreach process looks like for me and my team. And then we have the application process, whereby schools are submitting, you know, a lot of information because it is a competitive program about the realities of music education at their school, what instruments they have, what instruments they're asking for, details about the level of need in the community, details about the plan to use the instruments should their grant be successful. So it's a detailed application, but we need that information to make the decisions that we need to make. And through that application process, we receive about between 400 and 500 applications from schools every year. Teachers aren't sitting down in their evening or weekends to write a grant application just for kicks. Every school that submits an application is doing it because they need it. We're able to fund, depending on the year, 1 out of every 5 or 1 out of every 6 that apply, which isn't the worst, but it's not the best either. So, yeah, and then we have a pretty laborious adjudication process that we engage, a huge committee of volunteers. We engage music education specialists and compensate them to help us make those decisions and allocate those funds to where they're most needed and where there's the strongest plans in place for us to be confident that those instruments are going to be used. Then we make those transformational investments directly into schools, and then we remain responsive. We're always adapting our approach, and we repeat it every year. About a month ago, we announced the recipients of our 2025 school music funding programs, and it was a big year for MusiCounts. We were able to allocate $1.1 million to 85 schools in all corners of the country. We've never done 1.1 before, so it was really exciting. But again, it's great news. This is very special, and I'm so proud that we're able to do this. But you can imagine how tricky it is when you think about the fact that, for every one teacher that gets that good news phone call, there are 5 that get the bad news email. And the amount of emotion that's tied up in these applications is pretty remarkable. So we get to phone individually all 85 of these teachers and let them know that their application was approved. And these are some of the most emotional moments of my life, like the amount of passion and the amount of weight on the line for these teachers when they write the MusiCounts application is insane. I called a teacher earlier this year, a teacher in Southern Ontario, to let her know that her grant was approved, and I shared the good news. She immediately started bawling on the phone, which is not uncommon, and she explained to me that every month she makes a lot of cookies and has a bake sale to raise enough money to just repair the instruments in her school's inventory. And earlier that week, the repair guy told her that she should stop because those instruments were at the end of the road and it wasn't worth the money to keep repairing them. And she wasn't sure what she was going to do. And then, obviously, the MusiCounts grant was able to give her a boost at a key time. Not all of the circumstances are quite that traumatic or quite that, storytelling worthy, but every teacher, wants to apply to MusiCounts so they have the materials that they ought to have to do their job the way they ought to do it, right? So when we invest in schools, the impact is quite transformative. Like I mentioned, we collect a lot of data from the schools that apply. So we have a really unique national understanding of the state of music education in a way that I don't think any other data set has, because we're gathering between 400 and 500 stories, metrics from high-need schools that are putting in the time to apply because they don't have what they need. So we're able to look at all of that and have a pretty unique national understanding of the state of music education in this country. One of the questions we ask is, how much money is allocated to your school's music education program every year for the purchase and repair of musical instruments and equipment? And 60% of the schools that apply indicate receiving $500 or less a year. And as music people in this room, just how far $500 will not go. An investment of $20,000 from a MusiCounts grant is 40 years of funding all at once, an unprecedented opportunity for a lot of these schools to finally get ahead, as opposed to constantly struggling to keep up. And it kind of builds that program and allows it to be sustainable in the future. Most of the grant applicants or grant recipients of MusiCounts state in their post-reporting that they believe that the instruments will last their school for 10 or more years. So these are going to transform what music class looks like in these communities for a very long time, which is really special. These grants also have the capacity to allow schools to diversify and innovate. So we'll get a lot of applications from schools that say, hey, I've had a band program for a long time, but now I want to implement a hip hop program for my students because I think that's going to resonate more. That's going to make them feel more included, more reflected, like you saw with Darren. And that's really special to see teachers recognize the limits of their traditional programming and see a vision for something that's more inclusive, but obviously the barrier is the funding to get that started. So we're really proud to be able to support a lot of teachers with the ability to diversify their offerings. And ultimately what happens is access is created and expanded, which is really special. So here are just a few insights from the 2025 cohort. Like I said, over 50% indicate operating on a budget of $500 less, 20% indicate receiving no music education funding at all annually. 32% of our recipients this year were identified themselves as being geographically isolated. 50% of recipients indicated that only half of their existing inventory was in usable condition, and 20% said that they don't have any music education currently offered at their school. MusiCounts funding is going to bring music to their school. This graph here gives you just a bit of a sense for the gap in terms of the need that's expressed and our capacity to fund. Again, this $1.1 million doesn't fall from a tree. We work very hard to fundraise every year to do what we do and to try and close that gap, but the need is persistent and it speaks for itself. When we think about the pandemic in music education, we all went through it. We all know what it did. We all know how hard it was, and we could talk about those challenges for a long time. But if I were an optimist, I would be thinking about what were the positives that came out of that for music education. What good things may have happened? And when you look at the types of programs seeking support for MusiCounts, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, there's a perceptible shift. We currently receive so many more applications for contemporary music programs, for music technology programs, for culturally specific music programs than we did before, in a significant way. We were always funding those programs before, and those were always, a part of the applications we were receiving. But since the pandemic, I think it's really shown music teachers that music education is much more broad than maybe it was before. And that change is reflected in the types of applications we receive and the types of programs that are seeking support from our charity. So we think about this as innovation. What does innovation mean in the context of music education? Well, when I think about innovation, I think about something that is distinct from an established norm. So when we think about an established norm in music education, what do we think about? Well, I think we know what we think about. We think about Western approaches to music education, and we think about what upholds those norms. And we think about most provincial music curricula. We think about most post-secondary music institutions. So when we think about innovation, and the way that I perceive it in the context of MusiCounts' work, is innovation in music education is a deliberate departure from that established norm. So if we seek to empower innovation in music education, how can we empower teachers to embrace that spirit and put that spirit into practice in their classrooms across the country? So when the pandemic happened, and then we start getting again, a significant increase in these applications from music technology-based programs, contemporary programs, culturally specific programs, it kind of crystallized something for me and the team. Since 1997, we've had one application form that teachers fill out, no matter the context of their music program, no matter the type of music program that's seeking support, which worked for a while. But it became clear when we're seeing a school in northern Manitoba fill out our application form that it didn't really make sense. If that school in northern Manitoba was looking for support for Indigenous drumming materials, for example, our process was conceived to support the normative approach to music education. So how would it feel for someone to engage with that application process who was doing something that existed outside of that norm. They probably didn't feel very included. They probably didn't feel very represented in that process. Was that dissuading them from applying? Was that creating a process whereby they weren't able to articulate their story as meaningful as they should be able to? When we think about MusiCounts' historic investment of nearly $20 million into music education, I can tell you where the majority of those resources have gone. That's another one of these, as a funder, where we were kind of standing with, post-secondary institutions, provincial music education curricula, and upholding a particular approach and not evolving our practice to better accommodate and to better empower other approaches. So following the pandemic, it kind of really clued in for me and the team that it was time to kind of do a radical reevaluation of how we allocate the significant resources that we allocate every year. So I think I talked a little about all of this. Our process was conceived to support a standard Western model. The majority of our financial resources have gone into that Western-focused programs. Music education is not one size fits all, so that was our process. And we also thought about our diverse perspectives, adequately informing our program policy. Are we talking, if music education in this country is not one size fits all, and if it's so diverse, and if we acknowledge that so much is happening, are all of those different perspectives woven into how we allocate our funds? So what we did was we broke everything down into kind of two core streams. We have the Band-Aid program, which supports standard music education programs, your band, your ORF, your orchestra, you know and love it, of course. And then we have our Innovation Fund, which is specifically earmarked for approaches to music education that are contemporary or technology forward or culturally specific. And we are deliberate in saying that a pretty reasonable chunk, as you can say, of our annual allocation is going to go towards those programs, because we know that when we look at the majority of our allocation over time, those approaches have not received the same level of support. How are they going to thrive in the same way if they're not invested in at the same level? So that's the changes that we made. The main difference between these two streams right now is that for recipients of the Innovation Fund, you can use up to 20% of your grant to bring in someone external. So if you're implementing a steel pan program as a music educator, but you're not super familiar with steel pan, that steel pan aligns with the cultural background of a lot of your students, and they are going to be really excited about it, and you think that's going to really boost enrollment and get people excited about music education, but you don't really know what you're doing. So you can use 20% of your grant to bring in someone to work with you as the educator to train you to be able to lead that program with more confidence, or you can use some of that funding for that external person to lead workshops with your students. You can use that funding to bring in an Indigenous community member, an elder, or a knowledge keeper to facilitate drum making with your school or your community. You can use it to bring in a music producer. We know that the types of music education that are kind of reflected in the Innovation Fund, again, are not approaches to music education that most music teachers learned about when they went to school to be a music teacher. So we're allowing them to use a portion of their grant to help train themselves to offset that reality. One of the main ways that we do this, and I always say this is, we try to make it as externally uncomplicated and internally as complicated as possible for us. So what we do now, whenever anyone is applying to MusiCounts for funding, they start with completing an intake form. So in that intake form, it's supposed to take 5 minutes, and we ask two main questions. What kind of music program is seeking support from MusiCounts? Is it going to be a technology forward music program, a standard music education program, or a culturally specific music education program? And then which of the following options best describes how this grant will support music education at your school? Is it going to sustain an existing program? Is this going to allow you to add a new program that will run parallel to an existing program? Or is it going to help you start music education at your school? And depending on how they answer these questions, we will send them one of 9 tailored application forms. So then when they're completing their application, we're asking questions that better align with the reality that will set that applicant up to feel more represented and more included in the process. Because if someone is starting a music education program with their school, we need different kinds of information than someone who's looking to get an upgrade for their brass section for their concert band. It's different needs. And since we've done this, it's helped our adjudication process so much. Everything feels like it makes so much more sense. Of course it does, right? And when you look at the recipients by stream for this year, this is just 2025, you can see that again, the majority of our financial resources are still going into Band-Aid sustain. So those are still, those are your standard music education programs that are, are struggling to keep up, and they require these investments to make them more sustainable. But you can see that, a very sizable portion of our allocation is going directly into supporting those types of music education programs that, again, have not historically received that level of support. If I were to show you a graph like this of, 6 years ago, it would not look nearly like this. When we look at the allocation for this year, for the Band-Aid program, we had 318 schools apply, and we supported 52 with a support rate of 16%. And then for the Innovations Fund, we had 81 schools apply, and we supported 27 with a support rate of 33. So the chances of funding are better with the Innovation Fund, and we're intentional about that because we know what needs to happen. We try and tell teachers, apply for what you need. Don't apply to the Innovation Fund just to try and get funding. That doesn't make sense. Only apply to the Innovation Fund if you feel like there's like a clear reason, a clear, student appetite to do that. But this is kind of the reality of, the decisions that we've made for the trajectory of our allocations, and to see so many teachers take leaps of faith in their applications to try something new, to bring something different to their school, because they know it's going to transform the culture of music education at their school is really special. Just really quickly, you can see here the different kinds of supported programs through the Band-Aid program, and then through the Innovation Fund. I'll stop there. If you have any questions about any of that, we can talk about it. How am I for time, actually? Oh, we're good. Perfect. Okay. So we also have a community music funding stream. Every year we allocate about $400,000, depending on the year, through that. And since 2013, we've allocated about $4.5 million to nonprofit organizations that offer music education at the community level. Now, that is, of course, is more important than ever, as I'm sure you're all acutely aware of the cuts that were proposed at the TDSB, the cuts proposed in Newfoundland, the cuts proposed in BC, the cuts proposed in Regina. It's unfortunate but heartwarming to see a lot of community organizations step up to offer music education, because depending on the community, its place in schools is quite precarious. And it's also really cool, like adjudicating for the community music program, reading the applications is so special because the approaches are even more diverse, and even more creative than schools, because they're not bound to particular curricular outcomes or particular institutional rigidities that schools may face, right? So the diversity of what these community organizations are doing is so fascinating. This year was an interesting year for the Community Music Fund. We received like 100 or 120 applications, and about 2/3 of them were asking for things that they weren't allowed to ask for. They were asking for things that were related to capacity building. They were asking for things related to organizational infrastructure. They were asking for things related to staff training. They were asking for things related to personnel, to marketing, to reducing the fees that they have to charge young people. And that's always been a bit of a thing, but this year it was like perceptible. So now what we're doing is we're looking at how are the needs of community music programs different from the needs of schools, and how are we going to evolve our process to allow community music organizations to invest in the capacity that these organizations require to confidently and sustainably offer music education programs. So this is just an example, like we're in the thick of it right now, trust me. But this is just an example of, we're looking at what we're hearing from people, and we're having conversations about how we can modify our approach so that we're meeting more acutely the needs of the communities that are coming to us for support. And the other thing that we do, and I talked about this a little bit at the beginning, is we create teaching resources to fill gaps and empower innovative practice. So like I said, when you go to school to be a music teacher, certain things are talked about, certain things aren't. So what we do is we identify those gaps, create educational resources that are free, that are meant to fill those gaps to a degree. So these are a few examples of resources that we've created. Kanata was created by Cheryl Sue Pegaham, who some of you may know, who is a fabulous Indigenous music education advocate and one of our core advisors here at MusiCounts. So this is a resource that she created with some amazing Indigenous artists like Jeremy Dutcher and the Steinos Redskins. They were involved in the process. And it's basically lesson plans for how you can talk about these contemporary songs in your classroom. It destabilizes kind of perceptions about what Indigenous music is. And it gives educators a starting point to bring, music educators in particular, a starting point to bring conversations about reconciliation into the classroom, particularly if it's not something that they've done before, without the pressure of having to, reach out to their local Indigenous community and build those relationships and bring music in that way if they're not ready for that. This is intended to kind of be a starting point for that. We also have a resource here called 13 Guiding Principles for Respectful Partnerships with Indigenous Peoples in Canadian Music Classrooms. There's resources intended to kind of demystify what that looks like. Music teachers, I hear from so many music teachers that there's this pressure to decolonize their music program, but they don't know what that means or how to do it. They just hear it a lot and they feel intimidated and they feel alienated and they don't know what to do. So we worked with some of our Indigenous music education partners and created this foundational resource that introduces what working with your local Indigenous community can look like. And over the next year, we're going to be creating more localized resources to show how particular educator and elder partnerships function in all different corners of the country to kind of add more color to what is obviously a very broad resource right now. And then what we'll do is we'll offer localized professional development virtually so that teachers in that community or in that province can learn from that conversation between that music educator and that elder or that knowledge keeper or that culture bearer. Again, to start filling that gap, to empower teachers to feel more confident, to broaden their approach. And then Black Music Matters, Hip Hop and Social Justice in Canada. This was a resource created by Dr. Darren Hamilton, and I spoke about that earlier. And there's more on our website. And they're all free and they're all there. So where do we go from here? I think my main beef, I guess, is, I mentioned it earlier, the rigidity with which music education is understood. And I don't think we're doing ourselves any favors by doing that, because it makes people feel excluded. It results in systemic inequities, and I just don't see the reason for it. And I hear a lot of music educators, very rightfully so, express fear and concern because they went to school to teach band, and now they're being asked to do all this other stuff, and maybe their practice and their love is threatened. I went to a panel at a Music Educator Association conference a couple of years ago, last year, and it was supposed to be a panel conversation about band in the 21st century and how it can evolve to be more inclusive, etc. And it had a few really cool people on the panel. And when I got there, it was just one guy, and he was like, the other panels couldn't make it, so you're just gonna get me today. And it's like a packed room, right? Because it's a hot topic in music education, as you can understand. And, it was a pretty problematic tirade on why band and orchestra is, the approach to music education, and how the other stuff that's coming out doesn't scratch the same itch, doesn't have the same benefits for young people, and it was giving make music education great again, and in a completely unhelpful way. People were crying in the room. Educators were clearly really affected by the rhetoric that this well-known music education stakeholder was taking. A lot of people seemed very validated by what he was saying and thanked him for having the courage to speak about this difficult topic. And it was really interesting to see how some of this political ideology of division was kind of playing out in a music education context. And I think that the fear from some of the people who may be intimidated by, this call for inclusion of more diverse music education practices, I get where they're coming from to a degree, because they are not trained how to do much else when they go to music school. They ought to be trained, and they ought to be better equipped to navigate the realities of teaching in the 21st century, to be able to talk to their kids about the wide scope of career pathways that exist in music if you're not a performer outside of freaking musicology. They ought to be taught the foundations of music technology. They ought to be taught how to navigate, music of other cultures when they're dealing with a classroom full of new Canadians. When you think about I don't know how many of you went to music school, but when you think about what you learned and what you didn't, it can be quite jarring. And it's interesting, to use one word, to see that play out in classrooms all across the country. And I think it's time for a reprioritization of what's important for future music educators to learn, and maybe what we can create space for to allow that to happen. And I think that would turn down the temperature in terms of some of these teachers feeling like they're not equipped to do what they're being asked to do. So it's obviously extremely complex. I find it very interesting. And we're trying to fill the gap, as a very leanly staffed national charity trying to do a lot of things all at once. But I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned from the responses to some of our programming, and I'm really pleased to be able to be here today to speak to you about it. So thank you very much for having me. Happy to answer any questions. I think we have a few minutes, but if you have any questions, I'll be offended. Great. Oh, okay, yes.
We're probably a mostly El-Sistema-based crowd, so would you have something to say about how we can move forward as El-Sistema programs or endeavors towards that? And because there is a strong belief that the ensemble of the orchestra, Sistema-based, is worth, but also it gives us an opportunity working closely with the communities to merge those two streams of ideas. So
yeah, I don't have the answer. What I think is really cool about Sistema programs is one of the things that we've seen through our school music funding application programs is applications for string-based programs are way down. But in a community context, applications for string instruments are still pretty healthy. So I think that's, to the virtue of, El-Sistema type programs, prioritizing teaching young people how to play string instruments. I think El-Sistema right now is really carrying a lot of that weight in like a Canadian music education context quite broadly. I think that's really valuable, first of all. But I don't know the answer to that. I just I was talking to actually one of my friends who teaches an El-Sistema program, and I think she may be a bit, I don't know if she's following the rules necessarily. She's like, I've stopped teaching them how to read music. We're just making noise and having fun and improvising, and the kids are loving it. And we're doing covers of pop songs instead of the standard, conservatory repertoire. And the kids are loving it. And they're so much more excited, and it's working for them. So I think in an El-Sistema context, you can still use the instruments, but music that might resonate more with the young people, even if that involves letting go of, some of the values that might be very deeply instilled in terms of the music they, capital S, should be learning, maybe, but yeah. Of course. Any other questions?
I think it might be a conversation, I guess I can ask you. I'm a music educator, and I've been in different schools for many years, and I've noticed from where I came from in the Ottawa Valley that there's a number of schools that have no music program at all, and I've been getting these small grants to go in as a music educator to these schools that have instruments but don't have a teacher to teach. So I'm just wondering, does MusiCounts fund educators to go and help out schools or do you have that need teachers, or do you have any ideas of how I could help a broader community?
A few things there. The short answer is not really. From a school music context, the need that we perceive that you saw that remains quite overwhelming is like a need for upgrades to capital stuff, musical instruments and gear, right? So that's what we're focused on right now. Again, if it's a type of music education program whereby it falls under that innovative category, we do allow a certain portion of the grant to be used for training clinicians, stuff like that. We do fund a number of community organizations, not-for-profit organizations, that go into schools and do workshops. We don't right now fund the payment for the clinician necessarily, but we'll fund that organization to be able to acquire more gear to do what they do better. But this idea of schools having instruments that they don't have anyone in the room to be able to use is an interesting point, because I imagine, what are those instruments usually that are sitting there with no one able to use them?
There's keyboards, there's Wharf percussion ensemble equipment, there's even these funny guitars that I've seen that people learn it, they're not guitars, but they are guitars.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all kinds of different schools have different things.
And then when you go into them, are you just working with what you got and trying to figure it out from there? Or?
I go into a gym and the whole school will come in, or there'll be classes coming in, and I'll just teach. I'll bring all my own stuff and I'll just teach a workshop in music education, and there'll be like an appreciation, and there'll be rhythm, and there'll be singing. It's a workshop that I've developed, but. Then the teachers will say, will you come to my room and help me see what I have and organize it, but there's no teacher.
No, I know.
So it's just they have and some people have, there's schools that have equipment but no teachers.
Yeah, I mean it's wild and it's tough, right?
Yeah.
I don't magically have an answer, obviously. I think it speaks to a broader issue of obviously every school should have a music specialist, I agree, of course. When a school applies to MusiCounts for support, and it's the math teacher who's been at the school for 15 years, and they're a really good guitar player, and they're like, our school has no music program, I play the guitar, I'm a classical guitar, so I can do music with these kids. We're gonna say yes. Not to demerit the expertise of a music specialist, but to acknowledge the reality of how long is it gonna, how much advocacy, how long is that advocacy gonna take to get a music specialist in that building? And are we gonna make those kids wait, or are we gonna give that school a grant of $5,000 so they can get a class set of guitars and get music happening? So thinking about tools that we can equip schools that don't have specialists to equip generalists to be able to offer music education in a way that is actionable and movable now is interesting to MusiCounts. And that's kind of what we try to do with some of our more music appreciation resources, because those are designed, you can use them if you're a generalist or if you're a specialist, they're kind of designed broadly. So now we're kind of thinking about, what does music creation look like from a generalist perspective? Again, not to demerit the work of a music specialist. Every school should have a music specialist. But how long is that going to take? And how long are we going to let those schools go without music? So it's a very fine line. It's very tricky, but that's kind of, when we see 500 applications a year that are so high needs, we're trying to think about what we can do with the resources we have in our capacity to try and intervene in that conversation. Yes. You're all free to go. Also, he's giving me the wrap up signal, but you can go if you want. Yeah.
I was just wondering, I understand you're a national-based organization. Do you have any contact with ministries of education in any of the provinces?
Oh, we try. We have never received any government funding. We've tried.
Do you share your stats with ministries of education?
We have tried.
Yeah, I think the problem starts there.
Yeah.
We are all Band-Aid solutions.
Yeah.
Everybody in this room.
I know.
And
Oh, trust me. We've been knocking on that door for a while. Like we would love that to happen.
I'm just trying to think, what is the way that we as a music community can have any kind of, can get an ear
Yeah.
at the upper levels of decision making?
Yeah. I mean, we've come. I won't go into specifics. We've come close, and then captain shuffles happen, and then you start over, and then it goes nowhere. We were really close at one point in a particular province. And we're I know.
Well, thank you for the work that you do.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's very valuable.
Any other questions? Awesome. Well, I appreciate you all coming. Thank you.
Thank you.